Hello and welcome to the Godot community. My name is Sahira Dean. I am your virtual PLC lead for high school 2D art. Today I want to talk about end of semester ideas and activities. I'm going to share some things that I've done, and I hope that after this webinar that you go to the Godot community and share some things that you have done with your classes. So a critique is probably, a popular one amongst art teachers. A critique, this is actually a sheet that I use, not necessarily just for final exams, but just in general. It's a nice reflective critique for students and for teachers. So the student can leave responses and the teacher can leave responses. So the first question or the first, prompt is for them to explain the process in creating the process or their project. And let me stop and say that this sheet would be done before the critique or be handed out before the critique even starts. It also kind of helps to give students a kind of commentary or like some notes to kind of share or go along with if it's like an open class critique that they get up in front of the class and do. So explain the process. This gets them to thinking about, what did we do first? Did we start with thumbnails? What artists were inspired in this particular work? What steps did I use? That kind of thing. Elements and principles, of course, that gets them to thinking about how the elements and principles are actually used as opposed to just like bulleting them. So if they're talking about value, they should really, know what value means. And it gives me a chance to actually see, do they actually know their vocabulary? If there are some discrepancies in what they're writing and saying, or writing, saying, and what I'm seeing. Craftsmanship, of course, it gets them to reflecting on how neat they maintain their work, what they might have done differently, and then it gets them to see how many points they're losing, like if they have crumpled edges or if they, have a big hot Cheeto stain in the middle of their paper. And then there's a reflective comment that they can write at the end, which is good for me as a teacher because it lets me know like what they liked or what they disliked, and how they actually feel about what they finally did. So these are some works that were done by some of my students, some end of the year projects that were done by some of my students, just to give you some examples. So the first one was a blind modified contour self-portrait that they had to do. The second one is a value project where they had to draw a fabric and they could choose their background. The third one at the bottom left is a self-portrait on large brown butcher paper. And then the fourth one was a still life project using some plastic fruit that I had in the class. So with my AP classes, of course, AP classes looks a little bit different. We use the rubric that's shared on the College Board site. First day of class, we go over that rubric like the first week or two, really, and just to get them really familiar with seeing the rubric and seeing how they'll be graded. I think the biggest thing that I try to stress is them being honest with themselves and honest with each other. And I found that a lot of times they're more honest with themselves in their feedback than they are with their classmates. So, which is a whole interesting and another conversation. But the rubric, is on, they see the rubric at every critique, right? So what they have to do is lay their work out. And I tell them in a similar fashion, like if you were to go to Colorado in the summer, the instructors would have the work laid out, or the AP readers would have the work laid out. We'd actually walk around and actually look at the work and stuff like that. So I tried to make it similar to the real thing as possible. But what they do is leave commentary and the score and the rationale for the score in the little boxes. And so they know that they can overflow onto the back of the piece of paper if they run out of space. But so far it's been okay. So having a timed final exam is another cool thing that students have been pretty successful at. So usually for high school, you get a longer period of time, usually around an hour and a half to 2 hours to do your final exam. At my school, it's 2 hours or just about hour and 45 minutes. So they are given the prompt. They're given the prompt when they walk in the door, or they're given their assignment when they walk in the door. And what I do is I'll have the materials set out. That way I'm not, they're not spending too much time like digging out materials. And then they have a little bit of time to plan, and then they get right to work. So I've done this with this Kara Walker assignment, when actually they could choose to use black paper, or they could choose to use a black marker. I've done it with the self-portrait. I've done it with actual visual verbal journal prompt. And the pressure is really, really intense, which is kind of cool to see them really hunker down and be successful in this timed, final exam. And it's kind of another way that you can kind of see how students, like a lot of times students like working under certain pressure. Me, I don't really care for too much pressure, but everybody has their own learning style. Another one that I've done, and which I'm actually gonna do again this year. I worked at a magnet school a few years ago, and actually work at a magnet school again with a fine arts magnet program. And so what me and the other instructor did was come up with this kind of check sheet, and it was for them to organize their portfolio. So it had all the assignments from that semester, and they had to make sure that every project was in their portfolio based on whatever class they had. So they had to organize their work. If it wasn't finished, they had to go back and finish it. And they were given this particular sheet a month before the final exam. That way they were not pressured about finding everything at the last minute, or even finishing everything at the last minute. So they were given this checkoff sheet, and it's, again, the assignments are laid out by each class. That way there's no confusion on what they had to do or what they had to find. For the 3D assignments, what they had to do was organize everything into a book. So they had to take photographs, and have their photographs printed, for a final critique with their class. So this was very real world, I felt, because when I was in college, we had to do a similar thing, and it's so really good practice for keeping their portfolio together and well organized. So they get points for presentation, craftsmanship, correct uses of art language, right? When they're critiquing the works, their effort put into ensuring the works were complete, and then the mastery of the medium or content. So that's the rubric that we use. And what the student would do is they would organize all their work, and then they would have to present it to the class, essentially. So everybody would have their work out. We'd walk around kind of gallery style, and then we'd go back through and kind of talk to each student, just kind of guiding them through, what was your favorite project? Tell me about this project. Tell me about the elements and principles used, in this work, so on and so forth. So, I feel like this one is probably my most favorite, because it is the most helpful, most real world to the student. So what I'd like you to do is, we've reached the end of this webinar, is go to the Godot community. If you could join the high school 2D art discussion on sharing what some of your most favorite end of the year activities, final exams, final projects that you've done with your students. Any questions you have, please feel free to ask there. And please do invite one of your art teacher friends. It'd be awesome to have them a part of the community as well. Thank you so much for being a part of this webinar, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, you guys.